Okay, highlights now. I put on my palette, that's the brown sandstill. This is the sunny skin tone, and I've also used a basic skin tone which is actually quite light, just to illustrate the almost absurdity of different naming conventions on these things. Basic skin tone from AK and base flesh from AK. The name implies they're similar purpose, they're very different in colour, so I'm using this as a highlight, part of the highlight process. I'm calling it part of the highlight process because, and this is true of painting, for me, this is true for painting anything. I'm never going to use that sunny skin tone on its own on this figure. I'm never going to use this highlight colour on its own on this figure. I'm always going to mix it with my base colour. So the brown sand. Initially, I'm just going to slightly change my brown sand by adding some sunny skin tone, so it's now a little bit lighter. Let's see if we can see that. So that's the brown sand, and that's the sunny skin tone added to it. So it's only slightly lighter. This is what I would call a first pass of highlights. We're just going to start doing some defining of the broadest areas of highlights. And we don't want a lot of paint on the brush, and we don't want, I think a good exercise here is to illustrate how you can see that that's quite thin, and you can see the darkness underneath it. If I then paint the same paint over top a second time, leaving a little bit untouched, that same paint, same consistency is now more opaque, and if I were to do another thinner one at the bottom on top, you can now see that that's even brighter. So you're using thin translucent layers. This is still, at this point we are still using thinned paint as opposed to paint tinted water, which by the end of this you would probably argue we're using, but it's still thin, but it's not super duper thin. And the idea now, I hope I can demonstrate this reasonably well, the idea is I want to place quite broad areas of lightness on the top of the shoulders, and just start picking out some of these upper portions which are catching the light at the top. Let me just drop that back slightly. Hopefully this will become visible. So oh, let me just remind myself, I'm going to do this side now. I know I've done all that. You can see on his back there's some muscle groups here. I don't know what they're all called. That's his latissimus dorsi, and I'm just painting sometimes the light as your own lamp will help capture the existence and presence of some of those bits. Now what I'm also going to do is, this is quite tricky to explain, but as I paint, say on this triangular portion of his back here, I'm going to paint, I want to highlight most of that, but as I lift my paintbrush up at the end, if I start at the bottom and run my paintbrush up, when I lift my paintbrush up, some more paint will be left. You can see it shining at this point because there's a more liquid there, and that will deposit more paint at that zone. So if you can think about when you're putting your paint on, where you begin your brush stroke and where you end your brush stroke. But even just having done that shoulder, those muscles, and his back at the moment, you can already see it's starting to generate shape and form, and the colour, the highlight I'm using isn't a massive shift to a brighter colour or a lighter colour. So I'm just going to go round and have a look at that side and think about on his arm and on his leg where I want those highlights to go. Now, one of my issues here right now is that I'm getting glare when I'm looking at this on the screen from my own light, which makes it tricky. Let me just see if I can. Just gonna. No, it's not working. You will see on my figure here a line going up to his ear. Now that's where I didn't clean it enough. There is still a bit of a mould line on there, which is a bit annoying. But for this guy, most of the highlight, you look at that back, you're going to end up with some of this in shadow, which is still a darker flesh tone anyway. I really don't like. I wish I could adjust the. I know I can. Oh no, hang on. Bear with me, please. Why isn't that moving? Why can't I not do that? Nope, not having it. Sorry, this isn't going as well as I'd like. Oh, no, it's not even. Come on. That's it. Right, now it might focus a little bit better. Okay. So, yeah. All my descriptions have gone to pot. Not literally. The paint on my palette is starting to dry out a little bit because of the lamp and everything, which isn't amazingly hot, but just evaporation anyway, so I'm just adding a little bit more water to it. So yeah, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to start picking up too much paint. Back to my little bit of card, which is there. And I'm just going to put a thin glaze of this highlight in broad areas. This is general highlight, because we end up refining it as we go to lighter colours. You'll start to pick out, you'll start to see them pop out a little bit more, like on the upper figure. Now this is where it's a little bit tricky, because when you start getting into his abs in there, it's tricky to access with the brush. They're quite a bit in shadow already, but I'm just gonna do. I'm not even bothered about precision or anything like that. I'm just getting the paint into these areas of highlight that I want highlight. I can see under his rib, get that in focus for you, there are some little bits of abdominal muscle on the side which are tricky to paint, but they are there. Sorry if he's going out of focus. It's quite different to using zoom session stuff compared to using the native camera on the phone. It's all phony now. So I'm just going to put some bits of highlight on his face, broad highlights only, just on the upper cheekbone, on his forehead, on the nose, still on one side of the face for the purposes of this. Right, see if I can. So at this point in time, there are some highlights on this side of his body, where he's holding the mane of the horse, and there's nothing on that side of the body. Now I'm going to add a little bit more sunny skin tone to that base colour, and a very small amount of the basic skin tone, or in our case now the highlight, the brightest highlight. Still going into the base sand colour, so that's always going to be present in any mix, so we never start getting massive colour jumps, shifts from one colour to the next. And now I'm just going to repeat the process. The paint is a little bit thinner, and I'm just going to keep going gently over some of those highlight upper edges again. Let's see. I'm not too worried about precision and smoothness here. This is about getting paint onto the figure and to see the shapes and forms of the muscles on his upper torso. Because there's still quite a lot of this guy is in shadow, so it's really tricky to see on here. But there are now highlights on his back. I'm going to go for a better brush. The brush was a little bit too big. Okay. So when you end up, let's just see what we can see here. Sometimes you can end up with a highlight or which is maybe too intense, too bright, too thickly applied, and you want to tone it down a little bit. You want to reduce the intensity of it. In this case, because there's still areas of brown sand, the original base colour, which you can see there quite easily on the back. Left side has got quite a few highlights on it, that side has none at this point in time, and as I twist him round you can see some of the rib bits I've put in. You can see the difference between each side of his body. So at the moment I feel there's too much, that's too bright compared to this, and the transition is quite abrupt. So I'm going to take my brown sand, the base colour, whatever your base colour is, and I'm going to thin it to a much more translucent layer. So this is going to be a glaze. It's going to be where are we on? Oh, where are we on? There we go. So you can see how thin that is. You can hardly see it. If we go back to that area I was doing before, what I'm going to do is apply that over top of my highlight, and it will reduce that brightness and go back to that original colour a little bit more, but it won't be just straightforward painting over it. So you will still have the highlight element of it shining through the, here we go, no, I'm not going to do it over the whole thing. I'm just going to do it over that edge where the two colours meet. I'm going to do it on a couple of other bits as well. Get that bit. Where we go? Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Where's it gone? There you go. Right. When this wobbles, by the way, that's because my visor catches it, because it's to get these things all lined up with a camera close enough to see the figure, with me close enough to paint the figure, is inevitably some crashing. And where that transition has now dried, I'm just going to do the same again. And you can keep doing that, because eventually you would get back to the original base colour, but in what we want here is just to soften that edge a little bit so that it's not quite so intense, so sharp, which is in essence what blending is in acrylics, which is why it can take some time. Yeah, none of this is figure painting. Can be really enjoyable and therapeutic and have beautiful and wonderful effects, but it doesn't just happen. You've got to do these things to the extent that you're happy with. There's a Spanish guy called Mark Masclan, who has a few videos out, and he will go through and he will be quite rough in his application of highlights and shadows when he is what he describes as sketching the shadows and highlights, and then we'll go back and refine it like this and eventually end up with the most amazing painted miniature you've ever seen. And it's actually that sketching stage where you're putting those highlights on and shadows in the places you want them, where it starts slowly coming to life and you can start seeing the shapes and the muscles and things pop in. Now, if you bear in mind here that all we've got is the base colour and some highlight, or two levels of highlight, you can already see how that's starting to have quite a bit of character and shape compared to that side, which is still good. I mean, what I maintain is that we've created this side is a nice canvas to do these shaping effects, to give it form and make things pop, give it volumes. Look at the volume of each muscle group, the shape and roundness of it, whatever it might be. That's what we're trying to do here, is accentuate those a little bit for the purposes of painting. Because then I can now go to the next. I'm going to put a little bit more of that highlight colour, again mixing it with those. You can see the base colour effectively over here going through the different highlight elements of it. You can see how the wet palette's quite effective for just bringing in some of my paint from the base colour in order to mix that in, and now you can see that that is, when I paint that over top of examples of the base colour already laid, that's quite light but very translucent. So the idea here now is, say, for a third highlight, I'm just going to illustrate putting some in some of the really most light catching areas. So this is kind of exaggeration for the sake of the demonstration, but again painting in one direction so that the paint, I lift my paintbrush up at the top, which is topmost of his shoulder. Very weird muscles on this guy now, to be honest. But all the time remembering that I can come back with good, that's in, yeah. Come back with my base colour as a thin glaze over top to reduce any intensity of this stuff. It's a little bit too much. So this is 22 minutes already. Too long for a short video. So what I'm going to do now is stop the video, carry on this little process on this one side of highlights, and then I'll come back and do some shadows and discuss the shadow part of it. Okay? Catch you later.